I did it for 4 of the Federal Reserve banks. You know, bank examiners? I know I'm about to walk on stage for the first one, and the client's like, oh, these are bank examiners, Jan. They never laugh. And they were great. I ended up doing 3 more after that. But on the way there, I was in the cab, and the radio was on, and there was a disc jockey who was interviewing one of those foreign correspondents between all the countries that hate each other, Middle East, you know, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia. And the DJ said, oh, what a horrible job that is. He said, these countries have been warring forever, and you got to go in there and hang out with them for the night? That must be awful. The tension must be awful. And the correspondent said, no. He said, actually, every one of these guys is a master at using humor. He said they all go in and they practiced it and they joke around and they try to make each other at ease. He said it's more like a fraternity brother reunion than Middle East talks, which might be why they're not getting anything done.
When I was going from doing comedy shows to doing keynotes that included comedy with a message, it was really hard. Not so much figuring out where to market them or what to say. No, the hard part was figuring out how to move from jokes into content and then back into jokes. I was used to doing 3 to 4 jokes a minute and getting lots of laughs. Now, all of a sudden, I had to be comfortable with not doing that. I still wanted to kick off with some humor to get people in a good frame of mind. Then I figured I'd go into my tips and inject a little humor into the tips as well, just so I wasn't a speaker talking, and then I'd end with humor. It sounds easy now, but when you're used to clipping along doing joke, 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 then you want to stop and be serious, it just seems so hard. So I asked around, and my buddy Frank King gave me a great line that I still use today. He told me, start off with some jokes, and then transition by saying, hey, part of the deal today is not that I just tell some jokes, but I also talk about how to use humor to handle change, or whatever my keynote was. And that was the magic phrase that did it. It allowed me to transition into not doing all jokes. Like I said, I still added jokes into my series content, but I had a nice way to get into it. And that line let everyone know that I was going into some more serious stuff. So I figured out the transition part, but I still had to practice it. And as luck would have it, an agent called me asking me to do a really cheap gig about 2 hours away from home. Yeah, I usually don't do those because, like I've said in the past, once you agree to do something really cheap or free, then the client usually wants more and more and more, and they're just very hard to deal with. And you almost never pick up a full fee gig anyway. People see you, they find out you did it cheap, so they try to get you for cheap too. It's kind of a lose-lose situation, I think. So I try to avoid doing cheap or free events, but this was a little different because I wanted to practice my keynote. So I told the agent that I would do the event, but that it won't just be a comedy show. I told her that I was doing it only because I wanted to practice my keynote. So I would do my new keynote titled Finding the Funny in Change. If the client was fine with that, then I'd do it. I stressed several times to the agent that I was doing this cheap gig only for practice and that I wouldn't do any other cheap ones for her. I really wanted this keynote to work, so I had an incentive to do a great job, but if it didn't go well, then I wouldn't feel too bad, because they were getting a good deal. Plus, I knew that I could be funnier than any other speaker they booked, and if it was going really badly, I'd just ditch the keynote and do all comedy and get them back. So I figured it was no risk, and I knew the client would get a great event for cheap. I practiced a lot to get comfortable with just talking and not always doing jokes, and finally it was the day of the gig. So I drove down to the event and did it. And it rocked! Yeah, everything worked out perfectly, and I was able to do comedy, go into my tips, and then go back into comedy. All of my practice paid off, and I felt really good that I could do keynotes in front of other groups for my full fee. The client loved it too, and they called the agent. The agent called me and said, hey, they want to book me again for a free gig. I knew it. And as I figured, the agent didn't listen to why I was doing this gig for cheap, that I wanted to practice. So she was really pushing me to do the next one. I said no. The takeaway tip from this is, if you go under your fee or do something cheap for people, know why you are doing it and set limits. Otherwise, that's all you'll get is a free and cheap gig. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Feel free to check out my website, theworklady.com. This is Jan. Take care and enjoy your journey.